And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of the Petty and Ill-Informed podcast, where we give out petty and ill-informed opinions on various topics across the internet. Joining me, well, my only co-host tonight, Tom.
Yeah, joining you today from the wonderful city of Milton Keynes, where I am my family and I are on our way back from holiday, travelling from the north of England to the south and stopping off here overnight. So I'm therefore broadcasting, sat in the middle of a corridor in a Premier Inn, rather unceremoniously, just trying to keep out of everybody's way, especially my own family who are trying to sleep.
Nice. So, did you have that same conversation with your better half tonight?
Absolutely, and she was asleep before both of our kids. It's interesting you mentioned that, Richard, because I'm glad you did, because I actually wanted to say, for the benefit of our listeners and for yourself and Nikki and Kevin, hopefully they'll play this back and hear this themselves. You may already know this, but I think the reason that I am here some weeks and not other weeks is due to our rather unique domestic situation, which is that where I live in a house where we are, all four of us are riddled with different special needs. Both my darling wife and I have two children who register on the autistic spectrum, and in different ways they are quite tiring. My wife, bless her heart, has she gets ever so tired. She legitimately gets very, very tired, and we're trying to get it looking at doctor's appointments and stuff, possible thyroid things, who knows, and we're looking at that at the moment. So cutting to the chase, pretty much the only times that we get together, I mean, with me being a primary school teacher, and the kids and all those sorts of things, and how early she tends to fall asleep, the only times that we really get together really have just for ourselves are Friday night and Saturday night. So this Saturday night podcast just happens to be landing on a Saturday night when she and I, it's one of the few times in the week we get to spend together. So if ever I'm not here doing the podcast, then it's because I'm spending valuable time with my wife, because we get so few opportunities to spend precious time together. And I'm not remotely ashamed or embarrassed to say that, because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time and commitment to keep our marriage strong and healthy. My special needs are that I am absolutely riddled to the gunwales with ADHD, and so I'm probably one of the reasons my blessed wife ends up as tired as she is. I don't know if you can hear it. Some wretched water pipes have started making some thunderous racket above me. I can only hope that you guys can't pick that up, because it's horribly and unpleasantly loud.
It's fine, Tom. Don't worry about it. No one rarely listens when you speak anyway.
So there we are. Now, I was hoping to also give a little update. I just need to find the relevant news article, because
we'll get to that in a second.
Is there something that you had as something of a... Is there something you wanted to get to first, Richard?
Yeah. I want to discuss something with myself first, if I may.
Hit it. Well, if you may. Hit it. Go for it.
All right, so those of you who follow my blog and, followed me as a person know that I'm fascinated with the Australian cryptid, the thylacine, which is not really an undiscovered animal, but is in fact an extinct species of carnivorous marsupial. It was hunted to extinction within 100 years of us finding it, which is a personal best for the human race. There's not a lot of species we've wiped out without 100 years, so, yay for us. But the reason it was wiped out so quickly is because there was only really one population on the small island of Tasmania, and they weren't that hard to find. So basically, I follow a lot of online groups that look for the thylacine, because it is widely believed that there are still some extant populations in Australia and Tasmania. But this latest project caught my eye, which is the plan to de-extinct the thylacine, which means that they're going to try and breed them back into existence. They can, because famously they have some thylacine nuts pickled. They can extract the DNA from that to inseminate a Tasmanian devil, relative of thylacine, and get some kind of weird devil tiger hybrid, and then eventually breed the tiger back into existence. We have the DNA. They do have the DNA. The last living thylacine died in 1936. I know all of this. So this is a university. They're planning to breed thylacine back into extinction, into existence. Assuming it's not already still.
Well, Richard, it seems that you've cut out. I'm hoping that you'll make your way back quickly enough.
That's absolutely killing my internet. Yeah. So yeah, there we go. They're planning to de-extinct the thylacine.
Well, that's that. I mean, is that actually workable? I mean, are they? Is there any legitimate chance that they can actually pull that off?
They have thylacine DNA, so in theory, why not? Well,
just what exactly are they planning to do? I mean, sorry, it might have been because the internet connection was a bit sporadic a minute ago. I'm not sure, but how are they going to? They've got the DNA, but I mean, it's a long way from being able to, have the DNA to be able to recreate sort of a living being. I mean, are we in the world of Jurassic Park where they can do that now?
But cloning technology has existed since the 80s. Dolly the sheep being a very famous example. I assume they've been cloning dogs. They've cloned all sorts of animals. So maybe they start with clones. Once they've got viable DNA, they're able to grow thylacines as test tube babies and implant those embryos into a surrogate like the Tasmanian devil.
I see. So, I see. Well, I guess we'll watch this space.
It's possible. To be honest, I've followed Bigfoot for so long that I tend to view anything as a potential scam, and it's possible that this is just a money-making scheme. But they do have the pickled thylacine pups. There is that technique for extracting DNA from bones they've got. Lemoyes, Lenard, something like that. I know that it was all the rage in the 70s and 80s because they thought they would be able to extract dinosaur DNA from fossils. And map the genome. Why is it always dinosaurs? That's what I want to know. Why does everyone want to clone dinosaurs?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty dangerous. I think there's sort of some more slightly less terrifying creatures of the past that you might be able to recreate before you did dinosaurs. I mean, there's some of the land-based mammals. I can't remember exactly their name, but there's certain species of sort of like a mammoth. Why don't you start with a mammoth? I mean, I think that's going to be a little less terrifying than a Yes.
They are trying to the woolly mammoth, since they found that one in the ice. They've been attempting to breed the woolly mammoth back into existence. They've been doing there's the quagga project. They've been trying to breed the quagga back into existence. They're getting really close. The quagga could be the first animal that's ever de-extincted.
Okay. Well, I don't know about that animal. Would you enlighten us? What is that? I've not heard of that one before.
You've ever heard of a quagga? Or
No, I haven't.
Or how? It was a species of zebra that was hunted to extinction.
Ah.
It's got like a zebra's body, but it's got like a horse's backside.
Okay. I wouldn't know how an ordinary zebra's backside is, distinct from a horse's anyway.
Well, horses don't generally have black and white stripes.
Well, yes, but never mind. Certainly living up to our title of ill-informed. What about a dodo? Why can't they bring a dodo back? They were cute and lovely.
Listen. I get a lot of criticism for this. I know we hunted the dodo to extinction, but given the nature of that bird, how much of that was natural selection? Seriously. I mean, there are animals that we wiped out due to habitat loss and overhunting, and there are animals that was going to go extinct anyway, like the Falklands wolf, the dodo, the great panda. I mean, how much money have we wasted keeping that bloody thing alive? Let it go extinct. They literally have porn for pandas. Did you know that? The zookeepers play porn for pandas to encourage them to breed.
Yeah, they're not always particularly interested in helping themselves, pandas. I mean,
it's a waste of money. Let them go.
I do remember seeing that they insist on eating bamboo when actually their bodies are not particularly suited to bamboo, and they're far better off. They'd be far better off if they I think their stomachs and digestive systems are far more attuned to processing meat, but they insist on eating ridiculous amounts of bamboo, even though they will need absolutely tons and tons and tons of the stuff just to break even on the calorie count each day.
Imagine a species that evolved as an omnivore, refusing to eat any meat at all and sticking with plant. It's insane.
Do I possibly detect a thinly veiled attack on my vegan diet there, Richard?
Whoa. No one mentioned veganism. We're talking about panda bears. Get over yourself, Tom.
Well, far be it for you to lump me in with an animal that seems hell-bent on creating its own destruction.
I mean, they won't eat what they're supposed to. They won't have sex. If they weren't fluffy and adorable, would we be trying to keep them alive?
Arguably not.
No, we wouldn't. That's just, yeah. Well, yeah, okay. Or vegans, Gabby, you're right. I mean, either one works for that analogy.
Right. That's. I really do. My internet connection is sort of rather feeble, and I'm a little bit reluctant to try and bring up our YouTube channel at the same time. But I'm going to have a go, because I don't actually think I do anywhere near a good enough job of interacting with Gabby and SoFlo and all of our other loyal listeners.
Yeah, they're all in the chat today. Rog, SoFlo, and Gabby, loyal listeners. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Now, Gabby says that pandas can't even prop a bear. Well, they're not actually a bear. They're more like raccoons than bears genetically. They're rodents.
Yeah, I did.
I'd have to look into that, but I know they're not bears.
No, I definitely did read that. Yeah. Okay. So it's just trying to bring up the YouTube feed now. Now, whilst it's doing that,
Yeah, now I
can't.
can just see. Anyway, but yeah, I have been on that soapbox for years that pandas should just be allowed to go extinct.
Well, I do wish they would help themselves. Uh, I thought you knew better than to interact with Gabby. Well, Gabby. I'm still waiting for the Facebook friend request. I'm sitting here, all lonesome, in endless longing to hear from you directly. Bless you, or something like that.
Then,
Okay.
Tom, I have to draw your attention to the Petty and Uninformed podcast liability waiver. We are no way irresponsible for anything that may happen to you after friending Gabby on Facebook.
In which case, Gabby, Gabby and anyone else, I'd totally leave the ball in your court. You're welcome. You're welcome to add me as a Facebook friend at any time. It's absolutely, totally up to you guys, you splendid listeners. So
you had an update for P&O for us.
I do. This is because this is, I believe, the second time Richard's made the ill-informed decision to leave me in charge of the subject matter. The first time was a few months ago when P&O Ferries, who are a shipping company that move sort of passengers and freight across different ports in the British Isles to Ireland and mainland Europe, they made the highly controversial and illegal decision to fire nearly 800 employees with absolutely no notice. They were given almost their entire offshore. By that I mean offshore workforce. That's the people who run the ferries, not the people in the offices. They were all right. They looking after the landlubbers. They fired 800 employees in illegal circumstances, and the situation was they came out and they said, we knew we were doing something illegal. We know that we should not, we should have given these people proper notice and proper payouts, and done it all by the book, but they deliberately didn't, because it was easier and quicker and more expedient than to do it properly. And we all debated what sort of action P&O should face over this. And we were all in unanimous agreement that the proverbial shit most definitely needed to hit the fan for this disgusting way to treat your entire workforce, some of whom have been, on your books and in your service for decades. Well, here, what happened is it was today, in the early hours of the morning, news emerged in the news that they will not be facing criminal action over the way they fired nearly 800 employees earlier this year. And because a government agency said, and we quote, following a full and robust criminal investigation, there's no realistic prospect of a conviction. And a government spokesman has said that in sacking 800 dedicated staff on the spot, they not only acted callously, but failed to uphold the high standards we expect of British businesses. And so whilst they've criticised them heavily, they then do not believe there's a realistic prospect of conviction. The Nautilus Union, which represents seafarers, called it deeply disappointing, and it's a decision that will be met with frustration and anger by the sacked workers. So only one only so just lost my thread just a second. No realistic prospect of a conviction. Yeah, we are. Only one day after P&O Ferries parent company announced record profits, they have been further let down by a system that fails to punish this apparent criminal corporatism. P&O Ferries have declined to comment. Okay. And it's just absolutely shocking that the government are not been able to hold this company to account for this. The Labour Party, that's the opposition in this country, the political opposition, they've accused the government of breaking a pledge to hold P&O Ferries to account. And the Shadow Employment Rights Minister, Justin Madders, has said, for all the hand-wringing of Tory ministers, they've broken the promises they've made after P&O's outrageous behaviour and instead changed the law to open the door for others to follow in their wake elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I would assume that's a terrible precedent.
It really does. I mean, I think following in their wake is an unintended pun, given the maritime nature of the accusation and the company. It makes you a disgrace to be British. This does. I cannot believe that they're just letting them run roughshod over British they're letting this company run roughshod over British employment laws. It's disgraceful. I can't believe it. How is there no realistic possibility of conviction? It makes no sense to me at all.
Well, obviously money's changed hands. Someone's been bribed.
Well, that was my
Tory
first
austerity. It's Tory austerity. You know, gut the NHS. They don't fucking care about us. They just want to get paid. Bottom line, you know. So this is, you know, it's just set a horrible precedent. Now any company can fire everyone and just get away scot-free.
Yeah, it makes a mockery of it makes a complete mockery of British employment law. I mean, yeah, and it shows. I mean, it does exactly that, Richard. It shows that P&O were right to roll the dice on this, that they could be this ruthless, callous, and disrespectful of British law and their own employees. And, you know, I mean, the trade unions must feel like banging their heads against the brick wall. What is the point? Oh, staggering. But we'll see. We'll see how they. I don't know if this is going to be the end of this. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But it doesn't make it look like. It doesn't make. It doesn't look good. It's a terrible look for our country. So, well, at least we all still have countries. And is it time, Richard, to move on to today's topic? A man who prevented World War III?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the man who stopped
before
World
you
War
do,
III,
can you shut down YouTube on your phone, please? It's really interfering.
Yes, I can. Out. Why is it really causing a lot of lag on my?
Yeah, you're dropping in and out.
Oh, okay. How's it now? I've now just got the one window open.
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Okay, right. But relying on Premier in Wi-Fi. Okay, so let's start. It's my personal belief that if it wasn't for the actions of one man whose name I believe is pronounced Vasily Arkhipov, there is a very, very strong possibility that none of us would, well, a near certainty that none of us would be here today. And so let me begin explaining why. The Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't know how familiar all our listeners are with history, but basically, in 1945, after the defeat of Nazism and Hitler, there was a massive power struggle in world supremacy between the East and the West, led by the United States and the Soviet Union, which became known as the Cold War. One of the absolute flashpoints of this Cold War, and it was the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. It's called the Cold War because there was not actually an armed conflict between these two superstates, which is very fortunate because by 1945, both of these countries were armed to the teeth with nuclear ballistic missiles. So let's get to 1962. The confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated into this international crisis because in 1962, it began in 1961, Cuba that had various complications and revolutions, and they felt very threatened by America, and they turned to Russia for help. Then the Americans, rather half-heartedly, in April 1961, supported something that became known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, where the Americans, a lot of Cubans who had lost this brief civil war, they tried to retake Cuba with some half-hearted American support, and it failed badly. And that showed Cuba that America was a threat, and they decided to call on Russia for help quickly. Meanwhile, the Americans had deployed ballistic missiles as close to the Russian border as Turkey and Italy. And therefore, by mid-1962, the Russian Premier Khrushchev wanted to level the playing field badly. By May 1962, Khrushchev and Cuban leader Fidel Castro had agreed to place strategic nuclear missiles secretly in Cuba. Like Castro, Khrushchev felt that a US invasion of Cuba was imminent, and that to lose Cuba would do great harm to communists in Latin America. And Khrushchev wanted to level the playing field, and basically said, if you're going to have your nuclear missiles right near us in Turkey and Italy, we're going to have our nuclear missiles right near you on your borders in Cuba. Now, I basically see this as two school bullies squaring up to each other in the school playground, saying, come on then, think you're old enough, think you can take me out, do you? Come on then, and doing this, seeing which nation has effectively got the bigger phallus or bigger nuclear warhead, except that the stakes were substantially higher than a playground brawl. The entire fate of the human race is what I believe, and what most historians believe were indeed the stakes in this massive squaring up of
dick measuring contest. Call it what it was, a dick measuring contest.
Oh, absolutely. It was. I would have dreaded to have been alive during the Cold War. And there were people who were just sincerely and genuinely believe that war was inevitable, and the threat of it caused people such anxiety that there are, I'm 99% certain that there are, confirmed cases of suicide just because of the level of anxiety produced by this international political climate.
Yeah, it's a miracle that war didn't break out during the Cold War.
It really is. So, shall we see just how close it came? So here's what happened. Uh, Once Khrushchev was determined to get the ballistic nuclear missiles into Cuba, first of all, they sent standard surface-to-air missiles, which were no serious threat to the US. However, on the 14th of October 1962, the US first obtained photographic evidence of much larger missiles. They had no less than 928 pictures were taken by air reconnaissance, capturing images of what turned out to be an SS-4 construction site in western Cuba. And on October the 15th, the CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center reviewed the photographs from a U-2, a reconnaissance plane named a U-2 plane. And they identified these objects that they were 99% sure were medium-range ballistic missiles. Right. There are no direct reports of the Soviet missile deployments to Cuba, but there they were. And there was an immediate, radical emergency meeting as to what to do about this. President Kennedy and his staff weighed up their options. Number one, do nothing. American vulnerability to Soviet missiles was not new. Two, diplomacy. Use diplomatic pressure to get the Soviet Union to remove these missiles. Number three, a secret approach. Go groveling back to Castro with the choice of splitting with the Soviets or being invaded by the US. So, a bit of brinkmanship. Option four, invasion. Full force of invasion of Cuba and overthrow of Castro. Option five, an airstrike. Use the US Air Force to attack all known missile sites. And number six, blockade. Use the US Navy to block any missiles arriving from Cuba. It's interesting, they insisted on using the word quarantine rather than the word blockade, because a blockade would be an act of war. Remarkably similar, actually, to Vladimir Putin and his special military operation in Ukraine, which is most definitely not a war, is it, Richard?
Absolutely not a war by any reasonable definition. His troops are just going for a little stroll across Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. Just but they may as well be going for a hike with their in their walking boots.
Absolutely.
So
nothing dodgy going on there.
So, as they did indeed put a quarantine, to all intents and purposes, a blockade in place around Cuba, and to prevent any further Russian ships arriving with ballistic missiles on their decks. The tensions were absolutely immense. The world really did seem to be on the brink of war. On the morning of October the 27th, a U-2F plane departed its forward operating location in Florida, and at approximately midday, it was struck by a surface-to-air missile launched from Cuba. The aircraft crashed and the pilot was killed, and stress in negotiations only intensified. It was assumed that the decision to fire the missile was made locally by an undetermined Soviet commander acting on his own authority. Later that day, at about 3:41 p.m., several aircraft on low-level photo reconnaissance missions were fired upon. And then later that same day, the White House later called Black Saturday, the US Navy dropped a series of, in inverted commas, signaling depth charges on a Soviet submarine at the blockade line.
Right, basically the few little skirmishes before a war. You can see a retaliatory escalation happening.
Absolutely. This, I mean, what these were small depth charges. They were the size of hand grenades, and what they were doing was basically poking this Russian bear and saying, you know, we know you're here. We expect you to, you know, we know you're here. We expect you to get out of here, or we expect you to surface. You're not swimming underneath our. You're not swimming around very near our waters with your, you know, near us. It's just the tension was absolutely on a knife edge. Now, this submarine was too deep to monitor any radio traffic. The captain of the submarine, Valentin Savitsky, he believed that the war might have already started. He believed that World War III had possibly already begun, and he wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo, presumably at Miami or something like that. The decision to launch. Now, what is interesting here, what's fascinating, is these submarines had autonomy to launch nuclear weapons. They did not need direct authorization from Moscow, which is something I find absolutely staggering, but they didn't. The decision to launch these they normally required agreement from two commanding officers on board, the captain and the political officer. However, there was also a third person on board, was our man Vasily Arkhipov. He was aboard this B-59 submarine. Okay. And he was the commander of the submarine flotilla. So I believe he was the local commander of the entire fleet. He also had to agree, and he did not. He said, no, we are not pushing that big red button. He objected, and the nuclear launch was averted. Now, at that point, it seems to be that Kennedy and Khrushchev suddenly had a real wake-up call, and they realized that they were within a gnat's wing of annihilating civilization. And so a couple of their diplomats managed to negotiate an agreement which Kennedy and Khrushchev secretly ratified. The Soviets would dismantle their offensive weapons in Cuba and return them to the Soviet Union, subject to United Nations verification. The US would make a public declaration that they would never invade Cuba again, and they would dismantle they would remove their nuclear weapons. They called Jupiter MRBMs that were in Turkey and Italy. And so both sides backed down simultaneously and they did it. They basically both did it. People aren't entirely sure whether Italy was included in this, but Turkey, right on the Russian border, the Soviet border, that was most definitely to be, demilitarized in terms of nuclear arsenal. So at that point, both sides genuinely backed down. Okay. When all offensive missiles and the light bombers had been withdrawn from Cuba, the blockade was formally ended. Well, the quarantine, I beg your pardon, was formally ended on November the 20th. And the negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union pointed out the necessity of a quick, clear, and direct line of communication between the two superpowers. And then the Moscow-Washington hotline was established. And things did actually die down in the Cold War for several years, until Ronald Reagan turned up in the early 80s and decided to play the school bully again with his rhetoric of the evil empire.
Fucking Jodie Foster.
Sorry?
Fucking Jodie Foster.
I don't honestly know what you mean by that, Jodie Foster.
What do you mean? Have you not heard my lecture on how Jodie Foster is responsible for the downfall of Western civilization?
It rings a bell, but Hey,
Oh God,
I'm
not another
ill-informed.
one.
I'm ill-informed. Well, I do. It rings a bell, but if I'm totally honest, I can't drag it from
All
the
right, all right,
crevices
right. Okay.
of my
So
memory to
Jodie
the
Foster
forefront.
was famously in Taxi, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taxi Driver, whatever it's called. I always forget. Is it Taxi Driver or Taxi? I think it's Taxi. With Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Anyway, John Hinckley fell in love with Jodie Foster because of that movie. In an effort to impress her, he attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was re-elected because he was attempted to be assassinated. Right? He survived his assassination attempt, and that's why he was re-elected. Because, he was a badass. Ronald Reagan took down the Berlin Wall, which ended the Cold War. And instead of living in fear of nuclear annihilation, we're now being vegans and drinking craft beers out of jam jars. It's all Jodie Foster's fault.
Hang on a minute. It's so what? You'd rather the Cold War was still very much going on?
You say what you like about the Cold War era. No one was a bloody vegan.
So what? The world's gone to pot because we're all, to quote Eric Cartman, tree hugging hippies.
Yeah, exactly. The world's gone to hell because of Jodie Foster.
Oh, it's of all the things that have gotten worse since 1990. I think most people would agree the end of nuclear threat between Russia and America and, well, the West really isn't one of the worst things to have happened in the past 32 years.
But what it's given rise to: TikTok, Twitter, veganism, hipsters, all because the Cold War ended. We just had mods and rockers in the Cold War. Punks. Punk was awesome. We had glam rock during the Cold War, the best form of music. Just, it's depressing.
Well, next thing you'll say is that you're relishing the prospect of this renewed antagonism from. Are you going to get a Putin tattoo or something next, Richard? What is wrong with you?
It's not cool what he's doing, but it's hardly a Cold War, is it? It's going to be a real war soon enough. Not that it's going to matter to us. He all but said he was going to nuke England as a message to America, so it's not really going to matter to us what happens. We'll all be dead. But
well, that's the alarming. That's the most alarming thing about these. About this is the sort of the absolute futility of defense back against nuclear weapons.
It's exactly the same logic as the P&O situation, though. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just happened. It's gonna happen. It has happened, and it will happen. And there's fuck all we can do about it.
Well, indeed there is. So, what ties in quite nicely with this right now is, we've had a celebrity death. Rest in peace, Raymond Briggs. I think within the last week or so, he's
Raymond Briggs.
Who's Raymond Briggs?
Yeah.
Are you serious? Who's Raymond Briggs? Richard, you are kidding me.
Well, it might be someone I know. It's just I don't know their name.
Lord have mercy. He's the person who wrote The Snowman and Fungus the Bogeyman and
The Snowman.
And Where the Wind Blows.
Oh,
Have you read the book? Well, it's a graphic novel. Have you heard of the graphic novel When the Wind Blows?
yeah, it's that post-apocalyptic thing when they die of radiation poisoning.
Exactly. And what it's such a simple tale, and it's all the more brutally effective for its simplicity. What basically, if you haven't for our listeners who haven't either read the graphic novel or seen the incredible animated film of When the Wind Blows, what basically happens is it's set in the middle of the Cold War era, and it's basically what would happen in the event of a nuclear missile. There's this hapless, adorable, but hopeless and hapless old couple who live, just in a village peacefully in England, probably sometime in the 1950s or 60s. And the radio suddenly says, nuclear missiles are heading for Great Britain. You have 3 minutes.
Well, you're missing the scene where the husband takes one of the doors and drills it against the wall and his wife gets arsey with it. I felt like that was critical to the story.
Well, the whole essence of the story is it mixes with wondrous contrast their small petty domestic concerns with a bigger picture that is just far, far too big for their brains to possibly comprehend. I think actually it must actually be set in the early 80s. It's set in the early 80s because a pamphlet, and you can download the PDF of this from the internet, a pamphlet was given out by the British government in the early 80s called Protect and Survive. It is the most pitiful publication you could imagine. It tells you basically how to have your best chance of surviving a nuclear attack. It's ridiculous. It's the equivalent.
Honestly, your best bet of surviving a nuclear blast is not being in it.
Exactly. It's
hiding behind a door ain't going to do shit.
I mean, it's the equivalent of saying, in the event of a tsunami, take a deep breath. It's pitiful, and the advice it gives you is so miserably inadequate because there is nothing you can do in the face of a nuclear fucking weapon. And it tells you things like exactly as you pointed out, Richard. They say get a door, put it at 45 degrees to the wall and hammer that in. And while he's doing that, she's coming out with stuff like, oh, that'll make holes in the wallpaper. And, when this 3-minute siren comes in, she goes, oh, hang on, I've just got to get the washing in. I mean, it's basically...
And he grabs her and drags her behind the door,
Imagine an episode of Postman Pat where a nuclear missile lands, and that is the story of When the Wind Blows. And they are so utterly ill-prepared physically and psychologically for what is happening to them. It's a tragic and terrible film to watch, but it's so important and so significant because it just shows so brutally what the reality of a nuclear weapon would be like. I mean, for example, they tried to switch on. There's all these. It's full of black humor. Raymond Briggs' attitude was basically if you can't laugh, you'll cry. So he does things like, he has them do things. It's wonderfully scripted, wonderfully written. Things like, let's see what they say on the news, and they switch on the news. Am I disturbing no guests?
Well, it's nearly midnight, and I close the door so that you can have a long conversation. But I don't want to have anyone coming down and say anything before it's.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. No, we're trying to keep it quiet overnight. There are a lot of families with kids.
Well, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, listeners, that's me being formally told off and told to be quiet at the end of the podcast.
Oh, Tom, you are right. Okay, from the chat, A_NG. No French in the chat.
Then, Richard, I've crept into a disabled toilet. I can hopefully finish up in here.
Gordon, we'll wrap it up now. It's all right. It's not been a good show. We both had technical difficulties. A_NG, my face isn't showing because the internet just isn't ready for the raw sexual energy
Richard, let me just finish my one last point. All it was is just to conclude, when that nuclear when after the blast, this poor couple, what happens to them is that, well, they eventually die, but you know, part of their futility is when they try to switch on the telly, nothing happens. They try to switch on the radio, nothing happens. And then they just say, oh, we'll have to wait for the morning paper then, because they have no idea that civilization has ended.
I don't understand the logic of doomsday preppers. You know, why do you want to outlive humanity? Just melt with the masses and get it over with.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good night, everyone. And I may or may not see you next week, everybody.
See you, Tom.
Bye, Richard, and good night, everybody.
Good night, Tom. Spoiler alert, you will see him again next week. What? I thought you were going. No? Okay. Let's see, what else we've got in the chat. Gabby, always nice to hear from you. SoFlo, thanks for joining us. Rod, thank you for being here. A-Space Angie, I totally am the boss of you. Let's be fair here. That'll wrap me up for this week. I will return next week, where hopefully I will have at least one more co-host. We're going to do the Sandy Melgar thing next week. I've put that off for as long as, despite those of men. Thanks, Gabby. But yeah, we're going to do the Sandy Melgar case next week. Put it off for as long as I can. Something more interesting kept popping up. But I really want to cover that case because there's so many questions. I'll see you all next week. Good night from me. And, well, no, it's just good night from me. Good night.